Paranormal believers of Reddit, what made you believe? Serious. When I was younger, my mom used to invite random neighborhood children over for dinner and parties so that they could eat. At my sister's birthday party, everyone was outside getting ready to hit the piñata. My father noticed the girl sitting inside staring at the window at us. We have a large window beside the front door. He told me to go inside and ask her to come out and join the party. I ran up the walkway, looking at her through the window as I went towards the door, and then as soon as I passed through the doorway, losing sight of her for just a few seconds, she was gone. My dad thought she had fallen. There's a couch in front of the window, so he thought she fell on the couch. I looked around for her, but couldn't find her, so I told my dad. He helped me look for her, but still nothing. No one else saw her except me and my dad. My mom said she didn't recall inviting any girls with our description of her. We forgot about it until some years later, though. I don't really know exactly how many. My dad and I were sitting in the living room, watching TV. From my dad's armchair, you can see into the kitchen a little bit. Me and my dad were talking about the show we were watching when he suddenly got quiet. He said my name and motioned for me to come over to him. He told me to look at the microwave. I saw that girl's reflection in the microwave, exactly the same as before. I ran into the kitchen, and my dad followed, but again, no one was there. We were both pretty spooked, so we went out for ice cream until my mom came home. I thought it was a neighborhood kid playing a prank on us the first time, but seeing her the second time unchanged in our kitchen many years later made me start believing in ghosts. A few years ago, my great-grandmother was in her last few days. My family lives a couple of hours away, and I wasn't really able to get there. I had just seen her a couple of weeks before that and had personally made peace with the inevitable. One night, I had a dream where my great-grandmother and I had a nice, long conversation in the house that she lived in when I was a young kid. We talked about her life and experiences, my life and my future. It was the most vivid and lucid dream I've ever had. The next morning, my mother called with the bad news that my great-grandmother had passed during the night, probably around 11 p.m. I don't know what time I had that dream, but I definitely didn't go to bed before 11 p.m. Personally, never experienced anything, but I've heard some pretty strange stories that really can't be explained any other way. For instance, my dad's aunt is the crazy one because she has psychic abilities, for lack of a better word. My dad took my mom to meet her, and she asked my mom, "Who's that standing behind you?" And of course my mom thought it was my dad just sort of messing around, but she went on to say, "No, it's a woman in a tracksuit." And my mom flipped. When she was a kid, she had a super strong relationship with her grandmother who died of a heart attack, and my mom always talked about her visiting her in her dreams. But when they buried my mom's grandmother, they buried her in a tracksuit, and my mom swears that she's never told anyone else what they buried her in, so there'd be no way for my dad's aunt to know. It's just things like that that can't really be explained, and other weird things that happen. When I moved in with my boyfriend, he told me there was a ghost, man, that had always followed him wherever he lived. I'm a firm believer in the paranormal anyway, but it really didn't bother me after some reassurances that he was benevolent. Not long after moving in, our roommate's girlfriend started staying over more often, and this ghost hated her. If she'd use the bathroom, the faucets would both turn on full blast. This would always cause her to run out of the bathroom with her pants around her ankles. The ceiling fans would turn on by themselves. The TV would increase volume on its own. You had to unplug it to get it to stop. We replaced the TV, and that one did the same thing. After a few months of weird shit happening, I awoke to the feeling of someone sitting at the foot of the bed. I felt the bed compress, as though a real person had sat down. I jerked up and looked around and saw nothing, but there was an imprint in our comforter where someone had sat. Several more weeks go by, and finally the same thing happened again, only this time there was a man there. Big hat, trench coat, looked like he was straight out of a western. After a few seconds he disappeared. I told my boyfriend about him, and his response was, "Oh good, he finally let you see him." After that, it just became normal. He sat at the end of the bed most nights while I was pregnant, and then after the baby was born, he must have went in and sat with her. We would still catch glimpses of him here or there, and you'd hear footsteps when home alone. We eventually broke up, and I gotta say, I missed the ghost way more than the boyfriend. I have 2 spooky incidents that happened after my dad died. First time is that my dad passed away while we were out of the country. It was very unexpected. A couple of days before he passed, he had had issues sending and receiving texts and calls. His phone was always on for business calls or emergencies when we were on vacation or traveling. Several days after we get back home, we're planning his funeral with my family. I'm confessing to them that he embarrassed me at dinner, and my last conversation with him was us arguing before he passed, and I felt horribly guilty. Just as I explain that, I hear my phone go off and see a text from my dad. We had his phone charging in the kitchen, so it was already creeping us out that none of us had touched it for the past few days. I opened the text, and it said, "I love you. Love, Dad." I obviously lost it, and so did my family. My logical mind says that it's just a text that he sent while I was testing his phone the week prior that finally went through. But his phone was on and connected for at least 3 days back home, and the text came at that exact moment. Then a month or so after my dad passed, I was driving to the first family get-together since the funeral, and I was sort of in a funk that this is the first family outing without my dad. As I'm driving through a rural area, I hear my dad's voice yell at me to stop. He taught me to drive, and I was very familiar with his panic yells. I slam on my brakes at an intersection with a green light for me, and an 18-wheeler comes barreling through the intersection. If I didn't stop, I would have definitely been hit. Once again, could be grief and thinking about the times my dad taught me how to drive, but still weirds me out to this day. Haven't had any other weird instances since these, and it's been almost 8 years now. Experiences. My own and others' people. There are things that nobody understands that happen. This is one of many stories. My grandma and uncles bought a house together in 2008 because it was unbelievably cheap. Every man who was married or in a relationship who slept in a particular room in the house would wake up from the same nightmare. We later found out a woman who had been raped by her husband's married friends had hung herself there 30 years prior, and the house had been going from owner to owner ever since. They, my family, did a bunch of purification rituals and finally ended up locking the room up for good. And that kept it okay for a while, but 3 years later, my grandma also passed away in the same house. So nobody wanted to stay there anymore, and they sold it again, for the same unbelievably low price they got in the first place. I have many other stories that are just as inexplicable, if not for something supernatural or other dimensional. I don't know how much I believe in most paranormal things, but when I think about the topic, I can't help but think about the mantis shrimp and what they can see. The human eye can sense red, green, and blue, and with varying combinations of those 3 colors, we get to enjoy millions of colors. The mantis shrimp has 16 different receptors, meaning the mantis shrimp can see in potentially trillions of colors we are physically incapable of even imagining. I believe that it's not just possible, but almost guaranteed, that there's a huge portion of knowledge we're locked out of because we, as a species, simply are lacking whatever specialized organs that could allow us to study and explain. The problem is, try imagining a brand new sense. How do you explain it to others that have never felt it? If you can't feel it, how do you build a machine that translates it into senses you can experience? There's just so much we don't know that we don't know. Current scientific evidence suggests paranormal doesn't exist. But I'm willing to say that there's every chance that we don't know how to interact with that part of the universe yet, and that one day the supernatural skeptics, myself included, may be completely proven wrong. My husband and I live in a 100-year-old house. It's always been a little creepy, like hearing people talking in another room, and going in there's no one in there. But a couple of years ago, we had 2 really good hauntings that totally convinced me the paranormal is real. The first thing that happened was when I was sleeping on the living room floor in front of the TV because I'd hurt my back and was trying to get it to unkink. I woke up at 4 a.m. and I heard the mantel clock chime 4. I'm sure I was awake because I watched TV for a few minutes. I heard my husband walk into the room behind me, pick up the comforter, and spoon behind me with his arm thrown over my waist. After a couple of minutes, it was like his arm weighed a ton, and he was throwing a lot of heat. Just about then, I heard my husband start snoring. In the bedroom. I was like, oh shit, freaking terrified. So I counted to 3, and I threw the cover off and ran. Woke him up, and we looked, and there was no one else in the house. I know there was something there though. The second time, we were both asleep in the bedroom at about 4 a.m. again. My husband says he woke up to hear 2 little girls talking. He could hear that they were playing jacks. He could hear the ball bouncing and the metal sound of the jacks on the wood floors. One of the little girls says to the other one, "Watch this." And she goes, "Mama, Mama." And I sat straight up, still asleep, and said, "What, baby?" Once a mom, always a mom, right? The little girls laughed because it worked. So he kind of shook me awake, and I looked at him and then at the doorway where the little girls were. They looked real, except their outlines were wavering, and they were almost black and white in coloring. They saw us both looking and laughed. Then the older girl grabbed the little one's hand, and they walked right through the bedroom wall and disappeared. It was the night after my dad unexpectedly died a few years ago. He always used to make fun of me for watching paranormal shows. I would jokingly tell him that if I ever died, to watch for weird shit to happen because I was going to give him a sign that it's real. I was lying in bed sobbing and trying to process that I had just lost him. I was trying to be quiet because I was lying next to my boyfriend at the time, who was sleeping. It was the absolute most painful feeling I've ever felt to this day. All of a sudden, my phone that was on the nightstand started lighting up and beeping. No notifications, just flashing on and off while making noises. It wasn't plugged in, just sitting there. After about 2 minutes of it, I was almost in a panic. I'm still not sure why, but it scared me. I said out loud, "Dad, if that's you, please stop, because I'm freaking out." And then it stopped. Just as quickly as it had started. I know it was him. I've regretted telling him to stop since the second that it came out of my mouth. I've never really felt him since. Maybe it was him just letting me know that he was there, and that all the shit he gave me for believing was worth it. Maybe I was just at a mental breaking point. Who knows? But I'm glad it happened, and that I got to experience it. We were raised non-religious, and my parents were very rational, placed a lot of emphasis on science and education. I occasionally felt weird in certain places that had an eerie history/environment, but always put it down to my mind playing tricks. My first year at college, I had an encounter that shook me enough that I called home in a panic, only to be informed that my family has had the ability to see spirits for multiple generations, and that there was nothing to fear. The calm, matter-of-fact way my dad told me that my grandfather, my uncle, some of my cousins, and he himself had the sight, you'd have thought he was just telling me what he had had for dinner. Some strange things from my childhood started to make sense. Anyhow, I just wanted to make it go away. Dad guided me, and it went away, and I just put it all behind me like a bad dream. And then the blow happened. I've posted this before, so here goes. I've only seen spirits twice. It is more usual for me to get a feeling of general unease when I'm somewhere with high paranormal activity. This is about the last time I saw a spirit, and only time I saw one so clearly, a few years ago. My BF, now husband, and I were house hunting, and were interested in this nice single-story home in a good neighborhood. We called the agent and asked to view the house. When we went there for the appointment, the agent introduced us to this older man who was the owner of the place. He was sitting in his armchair and didn't get up, but nodded in our direction. We toured the living room, family area, and huge, beautiful kitchen with gorgeous wood cabinets. I noticed lots of family photos of the grown-up kids, grandkids, etc., and the place had a warm feel to it, but felt a little sad and empty at the same time. As we headed toward the bedrooms, the hallways suddenly seemed cold and dark. All the lights were blazing in the house, as is normal for a house being shown, but I couldn't shake the feeling of cold, dark sorrow as we walked down the hallways toward the bedrooms. As we approached the master bedroom, the agent informed us that we could look around the bedroom, but the owner had requested that we not step inside it, as he was still living there. The agent then opened the door and stepped aside so that we could poke our heads in and have a look. At this point, I was feeling unusually cold and sad. When I looked through the doorway, I saw this older woman standing just beyond it, staring back at my boyfriend and I. She appeared as though I was seeing her through a veil of water, with colors faded and outlines blurred. She was just standing there. This aura of inexpressible sorrow flowed from her, and in that moment I knew, or she communicated to me, that she was the old owner's wife, and that she was sad because he was suffering so much after her death. Suddenly, she was sitting at the foot of the bed, looking at her hand that was gently smoothing the covers. She told me wordlessly that this bed was where she had died after a long illness, and her husband had never left her side. She slowly raised her head, looked directly at me, and I heard her words in my head. "How can I leave him when he is so sad and lonely? It hurts so much to see him this way." My boyfriend grasped my shoulder, and I was shocked out of my daze. He turned me around and was looking very concerned because I was crying hard, tears streaming freely down my face. I babbled that the owner's wife was here. She died here, and she was sad that he was sad, and that she couldn't leave because he was sad. My boyfriend, who knew of my sensitivity, had seen nothing, but gave me the car keys and told me to go wait in the car while he finished up with the agent. I sat in the car and sobbed for a good while. When my boyfriend came back, he asked me what I had seen. I told him pretty much what I'd written down above here, and then I asked him if the agent said anything. My boyfriend had managed to find out that the old man was selling his house to move in with his son, as his wife had recently passed from cancer. He tried to find out if the wife had passed in the house, but the agent had not answered and changed the topic. This experience affected me deeply in many ways. I learned that the departed have a place to go to, and that not coming to terms with our grief affects not only ourselves and our living loved ones, but the fate of the departed as well. If you love someone, you have to learn to let them go, in one way or another. We never did end up getting that house.